Hello, in this video I'm going to do a follow-up to the week 5 workshops. Firstly, in the workshops I didn't have a version of the app with the extensions to the lab exercise, so we're going to start off showing what the 3 extensions were. The first of these was allowing multiple selection on the search screen. So let's say we've got a number of different Harry Potter books in this case. I can select all the ones that I'm interested in and then I can click save, and when I do, all of these should be added to the My Books screen. That was the third extension. The first extension was to be able to add deletion to this screen, so you can see that that's there, and the second part of the extension one was making it display multi-line labels. So I don't have any here, but if I go in and find something that has multiple lines, like maybe this one, and save, you can see this now wraps around and is 2 lines. And then the second extension, the remaining one, was to be able to tap on this and go to a detailed view that gives a synopsis of the book and shows us the cover. Alright, so that was the lab extension. The next thing I wanted to do was build on or finish off the demo for the first workshop. So this is where we were in the first workshop. We had some different favorites, and when we came in here we had loaded these and we'd cleaned it up to remove the paragraph tags, but we didn't yet have any images. So how do we want to add images? The first thing we need to do is we need to access the images themselves. So if we go in here and have a look at one of these shows, under the episodes we have something called image, which is an object, and that object has a couple of properties. It has medium and it has original. Though there will be some episodes that don't have any image information at all, so we should also make this an optional. So how are we going to do this? The first thing we'll need to do is go back into let me get rid of the lab task, and let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so let's find our episodes table view. Here's our episode data. I'm going to create a new enum called, a new structure, and let's call this structure image. Episode image URLs, and it's going to have 2 properties, one that was medium and it's a string, and one that is original and it's a string. And then what I want to do in here is I want to, so I need to make this codable. And then I want to decode this thing in here. So I'm going to call this image URLs, and its type is going to be this episode image URLs object we just created. We want this to be an optional. What this means is that I'm now going to need another entry in here in my coding keys. So I'll say case image URLs. Now this needs a mapping because in the JSON itself it isn't called image URLs, it's called image. but I don't want it to just be called image, so I'm going to say image. And because I have my own initializer, I need to assign this, and the type is going to be this image URL object. The key is going to be image URLs. But because this is an optional, at the moment, this statement is going to throw an error if it can't decode the thing. And when we have something that's optional here and it can be given null, we can put a question mark on here. And then if this thing can't be found in the JSON object, then it just ends up with this property being nil, and it doesn't throw an error, it just carries on, which is what we want. So if I run this with any luck, it should decode, which it does. Okay, great. So that's step one. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of extra properties in my episode data. And these extra properties are going to be used to track whether I've loaded an image from the web for this. And if I have, I'm going to store it as a UI image. Initially it'll be nil. And also I have a boolean here that's going to check whether an image is downloading. And that's just so if I'm showing the cell a few times, I'm not going to start downloading its image and then display the cell again and then start downloading its image again. We don't want that. So I have that. The next thing I'm going to do is, where would I display this information? I would display this information as I load each table view. There's no point loading all of the images if I never scroll down to look at the later ones. Maybe we'll pick something like The Wire, which maybe has more episodes. Let's say the user never scrolls down in here, then we don't need to bother loading the image for that. So you might think that an obvious place to put the sorry, someone just interrupted me and come into the room. You might think that an obvious place to do this would be when the cell loads. But the issue with that, like we talked about in the workshop about table views, is that cells get reused. So let's say I'm in my cell for row at index path method, and I put some logic here that basically says if there's no image, then load an image and then set the image property of a cell. And the issue with that is that that cell might have been reused. And if it's been reused, you might be setting an image on completely the wrong cell. Now, we probably don't know what each image for each episode should look like unless you're a real fan of the show, but you could try that out yourself and see what happens if you wanted to. The other thing I need to do here is I need to add an image here. So I'm going to select this bottom label. I'm going to find the constraint that constrains it to the bottom and delete it. And I'm going to find the episode and make a bit of extra space here. Then I'm going to add an image view and just drop this onto the canvas. And I'm going to set up some constraints here. A constraint that is to the label above, to the side, to the other side, and to the bottom. And when I do this, I'm going to have constraints on this. Now, what's still missing from this is a constraint that says, let me just check that I have the constraints. Yeah, they are to the image view, even though it's displaying a bit weirdly here. And I'm going to set an aspect ratio on this as well. And the aspect ratio constraint, if I double click on it, I'm going to set widescreen, which is good for a lot of the images off lots of our TV shows, which is 16:9. So my cell is going to look like this. Okay, the next thing I probably want to do is some way to access this image view. So I'm going to open the assistant, select my content view and select the cell, and I'm going to come in here and create a new outlet. And the outlet I'm going to create is going to be called episode image view. So there's my outlet, so I can now refer to the image view. So in my code, at this point, I now need to load the image. So I'm going to paste in some code and talk through this. The first thing we do is we'll fix the indenting. When we've done this, the first thing we do is we set the image for the cell to be nil. If the episode already has an image that we've loaded before, we literally just set the image of the image view. Okay, so that's easy. That's the base case if there's already an image associated with the episode. What happens if there's no image associated with an episode? Well, we check that we're not already downloading the image for that episode. If we're not, we check that it has an image URLs property, and if so, we get the original image string from it. Then we try and construct a request from it. If the request worked, we set up a background task. And that background task, which is from here to here, looks pretty much like what we've done in the workshop when we're downloading an image. We show a little message that we're downloading, we let the episode know that we're downloading an image for it, and we perform a data task to take the URL and load some data from it. We check that this worked. If it worked, we try and construct an image from it. If that worked and we were able to construct an image, we say, hey, the image is downloaded, and we set the image property of the episode. So now the next time this table view cell loads, it will have the appropriate image. And this is the safe way to get it to update. I mean, the bad way I said before was instead you would just say something like cell.image episode image view dot image view image is equal to image here. And the problem here is that this cell, by the time you get round to loading the image into it, might have been repurposed and used for something else. So instead what we do is we associate the image with the episode, then we ask the table view to reload this particular row. And when it reloads, it will come in here and it will have an image associated with the episode. And when it does, it will set the correct image view. So what are we complaining about? Nil replies a context start. UI view has no member named image. So first off, our outlet here is wrong. So I messed up something here, and you can see the problem is this is not an image view, it's a UI view. So I've dragged the wrong thing across here. So we can fix this, and the easiest way to fix it is I'm going to select the table view controller. I'm going to go to my connections outlet, and I'm going to delete this. I don't even have it, sorry. I need to select the episode cell, and here are the connections for the episode cell, and here's the one for episode image view, and you can see it's pointing to the entire cell rather than the image view. So I'm going to delete that connection. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this content view, change to my cell, and I'm going to change this to the UI image view. So now this is okay, and presumably I can drag it across and reconnect it to the actual image view. Now hopefully that is okay. And if I come back in here, this should be happy. An issue here. So at the moment, we have a structure, an array of structures, episodes, and we're getting one of these episodes and we're trying to set properties on it. So it's saying that this would need to be var, but already actually, and maybe let's actually do that and just show what happens. So this compiles now. Let's run it. What happens? It comes in here, we go to Loki, we see it downloading, and we see it downloading the same thing over and over again, and no image actually shows. So it's actually downloaded like, a lot of images, about probably 200 or something, and a lot of them have been exactly the same thing. Like we can see 831.232, we can see 831.232, we can see 831.232. So it's downloading the same things over and over again. Why? And it's successful. It says each time image is downloaded, and then it does the same thing over and over. This is basically because at the moment, episode data is a structure. We have episodes, which is an array of structures, and here, where we go to change something in an episode, we make a copy of the episode. And because this is a structure, it's copied by value, it makes a copy of it, and then when we change a property on it, like setting the image, the next time we get a copy from the array, I haven't modified the version of that structure in the array, I've just modified my copy. So the way to deal with this, like we talked about before, is we could make this a class. And if we make it a class, it's now going to be copied by reference. We do need to add a keyword to say that this initializer is now required because structures don't have initializers created for them. And then if I run this now, I can click on Loki and you can see I have images here, and as I scroll down, it loads each one for me. So that's working. I can go into The Walking Dead. You can see it loads these couple of images. Then when I scroll down, it's going to load additional images. And it will be pretty quick when you go back and come back into these because it caches them like the browser does. All right, the final thing I thought I might do is someone asked in the third workshop about how to resize table view cells, like have them collapse and expand. So one way we could do this is we can add additional constraints, and you'll see I also put this in the version of the code that is available on Moodle. I might do it a bit differently in this one and show you how we could collapse it down so that, say, the text and the image here are not shown. In the one on Moodle I did a bit differently where I just basically made the height of the image smaller. Effectively all you need to do is change the constraints for the layout, which you can do through code, and when you do that, ask the cell to relay out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a property, an additional one, in here. Let's call this handle collapsing, and I'm going to create a boolean and say collapsed, right? And by default this is going to be false. Or maybe I'll do it the other way around and say expanded. Expanded is equal to true by default. So by default it's going to show the text and the image. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create some additional constraints. So, no, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to disable encode one constraint. So I'm going to take the constraint that constrains the bottom of the table view to the bottom of the image, and then I'm going to add an alternative constraint that constrains the bottom of the table view cell to the bottom of the second label. And then I'll switch between these two constraints in code, and therefore the height of the table view cell will either be based on the height of all of these objects or based on the height of just the first two labels. So how do we do this? First, I'm going to need to be able to refer to each of these constraints in code. So here's, let's select this constraint, the bottom of the super view one. It's in here somewhere, and when I select it, can I select it in here, or do I have to find it? It's not this one, it's somewhere in here. So not that one, not that one, not that one, not that one. It's this one here. Bottom margin is equal to the episode image view. So I'm going to control drag from this constraint onto my code and call this image bottom constraint. And this is going to be enabled by default. So now I have a reference to it. I'm going to create a new constraint, and it's going to be from the bottom of this label to the margins of the super view. So I'm going to say that it's going to be 0 pixels, and it says to its nearest neighbor here. We'll create that and then we'll deal with it in a minute. So here's the new constraint, which is summary label. Which one is it? Summary label, leading, summary label top. Okay, here it is. Let me find this constraint. So let's come in here. Here are my constraints. It's got one that's So we've got one that's currently from the bottom of the summary label to the bottom of the info label. I'm going to change this so it's instead to the super view, and it's equal to the bottom of the super view, and it's got a constraint, a distance of 0, and I'm going to say that it's not installed. So it's not active at the moment, but I could install it. I could turn it on in code. So that's that constraint. And you can see it's grayed out, it's inactive. And I'm going to create an outlet to this one too. And let me call this label bottom constraint. So you can think about what I'm doing here as choosing whether the bottom of the cell is positioned relative to the bottom of this image view, or it's positioned relative to the bottom of this label that we have just here. And if it's positioned relative to the bottom of the label, then there'll be other content, but it'll be outside the table view and we won't see it. All right, so we now have these two constraints. Let's turn them on in code. So what do we want to do? We want to come into our cell for row at index path, and we'll add some code in here and we'll say if episode.expanded, then the cell, which is an episode table view, if it's expanded, we want the label bottom constraint is active to be false, and we want the image bottom constraint is active to be true. And in the alternate case, when the episode cell is not expanded, we want the complete opposite of these two. So you can see I didn't really need the if statement. I could have done it based on the episode expanded Boolean value, but we'll do it this way just for clarity. So that's me changing this. So the only thing left is we need to decide whether these are expanded or not. I mean, I could test this already because I could go in here and I could set it to false by default, and we'll see how it looks. we should only see the title and the info label for each of these cells. We don't see any of the additional information, so that looks pretty good. Or if I set it to true, I should see if I set it to true, I should see the full info, which we do. So the next thing I'm going to do is just toggle this on and off when we click on a cell. So that shouldn't be too hard. We have a method we can use for that, and that's this did select row at index path, did select row at index path. And when we select a row at an index path, we want to get the episode from it. So we can get the episode. We want to now toggle the expanded property. So episode expanded is equal to negating the episode expanded property. So if it's true, it becomes false. If it's false, it becomes true. And then all we need to do is ask that cell to reload. And that's fairly easy. We can say table view, reload rows at, give it the index path, which is passed into this method, and tell it to, we can do automatic or we can do none. If we do automatic, you might see some fading. If you see none, it should just sort of animate smoothly. And this can be a let constant, like it says. Let's give this a go. So come in here, it's expanded, I tap on it, and it collapses. I tap on it again, it expands.